We tend to think of prisoners as tough, muscular, tattooed, and also we assume they're old enough to drink. But you might be shocked at some of the very young people who ended up languishing behind bars before they were even old enough to drive. Curtis and Catherine Jones. It might send a chill up your spine to know that one of the youngest convicted killers has recently been set free. Curtis Jones was only 12 years old when he and his sister Catherine, who was only a year older, shot their father's girlfriend. After trying in vain to cover up their crime, the siblings fled but were later apprehended by police. Although their lives before their crime had been fraught with abuse, they were tried as adults and sentenced to 18 years in prison and a life of probation. Both siblings pleaded guilty, and thus there was no trial and no opportunity for the judge to consider the abuses that the children had suffered in their short lives. As he headed off to prison, young Curtis lamented that he wouldn't be able to bring his Nintendo with him. At the age of 30, Catherine was released after spending her teenage years behind bars. She married a Navy senior chief who she had met as a pen pal in prison. Curtis was recently released at the age of 29, having become an ordained minister while in prison. Catherine claimed that she is happy to be finally free, but Curtis declined to comment on his newfound freedom. Lionel Tate. Although the result of young Lionel Tate's actions was undeniably horrible, there are many who feel that his sentence was a gross miscarriage of justice. When he was 12 years old, Tate was playing with a young girl half his age who lost her life as a result of rough play with the older boy. Although he was an intelligent child, Tate had been in trouble numerous times before, and there was much debate over whether this was simply a tragic accident or not. The prosecution offered Tate a plea deal that would have meant serving a mere 3-year prison term. Shockingly, Tate and his mother turned it down in hopes of an acquittal. Instead, Tate became the youngest person in America to ever receive a sentence of life in prison with no possibility of parole. However, he got a second chance when the conviction was overturned when he was 17, and he went from spending his life in prison to 1 year's house arrest and a decade of probation. Just a couple of years later, when he was 19, Tate was arrested for armed robbery, a conviction which violated the terms of his probation. This time, he's looking at 30 years behind bars. Max McDougal. When you visualize kids in prison, you might think of young kids in jumpsuits with facial tattoos, but some of the youngest people living in prison have done nothing wrong. Little Max McDougal has grown up behind bars because of the crimes of his mother, Jacqueline McDougal. She was caught stealing silverware in order to support her drug habit. She was pregnant when she entered prison, and Max has lived his whole life behind bars with his mother. Although she and Max don't interact with the general population, it's still very much a prison. Despite having to bring up her son in prison, McDougal calls her sentence a blessing in disguise. She admits that she was going down a bad path in life, and ending up in jail was a wake-up call that she needed to get clean and change her lifestyle. Keeping a baby in prison with his mother costs taxpayers about $24,000 per year, but it also lowers the rate of the mother reoffending. And since each year in prison costs $30,000 for an adult inmate, many people believe it's a better idea to let children remain in prison with their mothers. Mary Bell. A little girl convicted of murder sounds frightening enough, but knowing that we have no idea where she is now or what name she goes by is haunting. Mary Bell was convicted of manslaughter for her role in the passing of 2 little boys, Martin Brown, age 4, and Brian Howe, age 3. These crimes were committed when Bell was 10 and 11 years old. Psychiatrists believed that she was a psychopath, and the judge called her a danger to other children. She was to be detained until further notice in the Red Bank Community Home, a place for children to be incarcerated. Although this place looked like a normal home, it was really anything but. Children adhere to rigid routines, must complete chores, and are completely detained within the building. Later, she was sent to an adult prison before her release. She was detained for 12 years total and was granted anonymity along with her freedom. This means that she was able to change her name and travel freely, reportedly having a daughter and later becoming a grandmother. Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser. This recent case made headlines due to the young age of the girls involved and the bizarre motive. On May 31, 2014, 3 12-year-old friends, Peyton Leitner, Anissa Weier, and Morgan Geyser, were enjoying a game of hide-and-seek in a local park. Suddenly, the fun stopped when Weier and Geyser attacked Leitner with a knife before fleeing. Thankfully, Leitner survived her injuries and Weier and Geyser were arrested. The girls claimed that they had been trying to kill their friend to appease the fictional character Slender Man. This creepy character is a result of a Photoshop contest, and both girls insist that they had to attack Leitner or he would have hurt their families. Needless to say, this has caused a lot of back and forth in courts as the girls' mental states are being evaluated. For years now, the pair of girls have been incarcerated because it's believed they cannot safely live outside of prison. If convicted, they each face up to 65 years in prison. Despite not being tried yet, they will be in prison at least until their trials in the fall of 2017. Anisha Walker. During a difficult childhood in which she struggled to earn money to survive, 14-year-old Anisha Walker found herself selling drugs to stay afloat. One day, a drug deal went wrong and Walker ended up shooting a customer in the head. She was so young that the handcuffs kept slipping off her wrists as she headed off for her 35-year sentence. After being quarantined for a few weeks because of her young age, she was eventually let into general population. The guards had sympathy for the teenage girl, but she was still forced to work with the other inmates, picking and planting produce and moving rocks around in the field. Because of the years of hard labor, she now suffers from arthritis in her knees and hips. Walker claimed that the first decade in prison was the hardest, as she was still a rebellious teenager with a chip on her shoulder. Eventually, she realized that she was only hurting her chances of ever being released by being a troublemaker. She always dreamed of becoming a chef, but instead of learning to cook in the kitchen like other teens, she made treats using items from the prison commissary and her high-powered prison hairdryer. Christopher Hood. After being a victim of childhood abuse at the hands of his father and older relatives, 11-year-old Christopher Hood was arrested for assaulting 2 young girls. As part of his treatment in lockup, he was forced to recite his crimes every day in front of the other inmates in the correctional facility. Many of us were anxious about speaking in front of our peers at school. Imagine having to discuss the worst thing you've ever done in front of your classmates every single day. Hood claims that in order to make it through the day, he shut down emotionally and became robotic in his feelings and actions. Now that he is an adult, Hood admits that he didn't learn the social skills that other kids take for granted when allowed to grow up outside of prison. He earned his GED behind bars at 16 and is eager to prove himself once he gets released from prison. Because he knows what it's like to be confined and abandoned, he hopes to find work with abused animals once he's free. Josh Phillips. Josh Phillips was only 14 years old when he caused 8-year-old Maddie Clifton to lose her life. The case drew national attention and Phillips was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He has appeared in many documentaries about this tragic case. Currently, Phillips has spent over half his life incarcerated for his crime. He began his incarceration at a maximum security prison at the young age of 14, and the only reason he did not have to contend with the death penalty was because he was under 16 years old. Despite being behind bars, Phillips believes in getting an education. He has just had to do so at a distance. He graduated from a distance learning program with a paralegal degree and works helping others